My son turned 42 this past spring, and I still remember the exact moment I realized I had lost him. Not to death, not to distance, but to a woman who saw him as a meal ticket and saw me as an obstacle. His name is Curtis. I named him after my father, who worked 30 years at a paper mill in rural Georgia and never once complained about it. My father believed in quiet dignity. He believed that a man provides, protects, and does not make a spectacle of himself. I tried to raise Curtis the same way. I am 64 years old. I retired 2 years ago from a career in commercial real estate. 28 years of building relationships, reading contracts, and understanding that every handshake either means something or it means nothing. I learned early which was which. My wife, Curtis's mother, passed away from ovarian cancer when Curtis was 19. I raised him the last stretch on my own. I paid for his college at Georgia Tech. I helped him get his first apartment in Atlanta. I co-signed his first car loan because his credit history was thin and the dealer was giving him a predatory rate. I did all of this not because I expected gratitude. I did it because that is what a father does. Curtis met his wife, Natalie, at a work conference in Charlotte. She was in marketing. He was in project management for a mid-sized logistics firm. They dated for 11 months, which I now think was not nearly long enough, and then got married in a ceremony in Savannah that I paid a significant portion of because her parents, her father especially, a man named Douglas, who ran a chain of dental practices across 3 states and wore a watch that cost more than my first car, contributed almost nothing to the event despite having considerably more money than I did at that point in my life. I noticed that then. I filed it away. Natalie was never openly hostile to me. That would have been too easy to identify and address. She was instead the kind of person who made you feel slightly smaller every time you were around her, without ever saying a single thing you could point to. She called me by my first name, Harold. From the very first time we met, before I had offered it, before there was any warmth between us, like she had simply decided that the usual gesture of respect was not something I had earned from her. My friends' daughters-in-law called them Dad, or Mr. Something. She called me Harold the way you call a repairman who has come to fix your washing machine. Curtis never corrected her. I noticed that too. They lived in a nice apartment in Midtown Atlanta for the first 2 years of their marriage. Then Natalie decided she wanted to stop working. She had found the commute tiring. She wanted to focus on her wellness, she said, her Pilates, her ceramics class, her online course in something called intuitive business coaching, which, as far as I could tell, involved watching webinars in her pajamas. Curtis made decent money, but not enough for their lifestyle on a single income, so they started falling behind on rent. And then one evening, Curtis called me and asked, very carefully, very rehearsed, whether they might be able to stay with me for a while until they got back on their feet. My house is a 4-bedroom colonial in a suburb north of Atlanta. I have owned it for 21 years. I paid off the mortgage 6 years ago. I rattled around in it mostly alone after Curtis moved out, and I had told myself more than once that it was too big for one person, that it would be nice to have some life in it again. I said yes. They moved in on a Saturday in March. By the following Tuesday, Natalie had rearranged my kitchen. Not everything, just enough. My coffee mugs moved from the cabinet by the window to a different cabinet across the room. My cast-iron skillet, which I had seasoned over 15 years and used nearly every morning, went to the back of a lower cabinet where I could barely reach it because, she told me cheerfully, she needed that drawer space for her air fryer accessories. She put a basket on the kitchen counter with a little chalkboard sign that said Whole Foods Hall and filled it with produce I had not bought and would not eat. Curtis watched all of this and said nothing. I told myself it was an adjustment period. Everyone has one. They were guests in my house, and guests rearrange themselves to fit a space, and sometimes in doing so, they rearrange the space a little. That is natural. That is fine. But 6 months passed, and then another 6. Natalie did not go back to work. She talked about it sometimes, vaguely, the way people talk about a vacation they know they will never take. She joined a book club. She got a dog, a large standard poodle named something French that I could never pronounce correctly, and that dog treated my living room as his personal territory. Curtis got a promotion and a raise, which should have meant they could go back out on their own. Instead, Natalie began talking about the housing market. interest rates, how it made more financial sense to stay put for now, to save, to be strategic. I was paying the mortgage, I was paying the utilities. Their contribution to the household was a vague and never fulfilled promise to cover groceries, which they did intermittently, and which Natalie counted loudly as an enormous sacrifice. Douglas, her father, came to visit twice. Both times he stayed at the St. Regis in Buckhead. Both times he took Curtis and Natalie to dinner at one of those restaurants downtown where the steak costs $80 and nobody blinks. Both times he drove a different rental car, always something from the luxury tier. Both times he did not once offer to take me to dinner, did not once ask how I was doing, did not once acknowledge that his daughter and son-in-law were living in my house. Both times Curtis came home from those dinners happy and loose and talking about Douglas like he was some kind of oracle. Douglas thought Curtis should look into a lateral move to a larger firm. Douglas had a contact who could open some doors. Douglas believed the real money in logistics was in the software side. Douglas. I smiled. I said, "That sounds interesting." And then I went upstairs and sat on the edge of my bed in the dark for a few minutes, doing what I always did when something bothered me, which was nothing. Just sitting. Just waiting for the feeling to pass. It mostly did. What I am about to tell you happened on a Sunday in June. My birthday is in June, the 15th, and for 3 years running, Curtis had forgotten it, or rather he had remembered it a day or two late and sent a text with some emoji and the words, "Sorry Dad, crazy week." I had stopped expecting anything more than that, and the stopping had its own particular sadness, that I will not dwell on here. What I had not stopped expecting was Father's Day. Father's Day is not my birthday. It is not even specifically about me, but it is the one day a year when the entire culture conspires to remind your children that you exist, that you did something for them, that maybe they should acknowledge it. I had not asked for much. I had not asked for anything really. I figured Curtis would take me to lunch, or at the very least, hand me a card. We were living in the same house. How much effort could it possibly require? Natalie's parents were coming to Atlanta for the weekend. Her mother was sweet enough, a quiet woman named Beverly who clearly found her husband exhausting and had developed a private inner life as a coping mechanism. Douglas drove up from Savannah in his Mercedes. They were all going to have dinner together at my house on Sunday evening. And because I am who I am, I had gone to the grocery store on Saturday and bought the ingredients to make a real meal. Smoked brisket, which requires starting the night before. Homemade coleslaw. Cornbread from scratch. A bourbon peach cobbler that had been my wife's recipe. I started the brisket at 11 o'clock Saturday night. I was still awake at 2 in the morning, tending the smoker on my back porch, when I heard Curtis and Natalie talking inside. Their voices were low, but the kitchen window was open, and sound carries in a quiet house at 2 in the morning. I was not trying to listen. I heard my name, Harold, in Natalie's voice, that particular flat way she said it, and then I heard her say something about the house. About how it was an asset, about how I was 64 and not getting younger, about how if something happened to me, it would just be sitting there. Curtis said something I couldn't make out. Natalie said, clear as anything, your dad's not going to live forever, and we need to be thinking about our future. I stood on my back porch in the dark, my hand on the handle of the smoker, and I was very still for a very long time. I did not go inside. I stayed with the brisket. I did what I do, which is nothing, which is sit with a thing and let it settle until I can see it clearly. By morning I could see it clearly. The dinner on Sunday was a production. Natalie had set the table nicely. She had bought new linen napkins, which I later found out she charged to the joint account she shared with Curtis, which meant my son had paid for the napkins at a dinner in my house for his wife's parents. Beverly brought flowers from a grocery store and apologized that they were not nicer. Douglas arrived with a bottle of wine and a wooden gift box. He set it on the counter and told Curtis it was a 2009 Napa Cabernet from a vineyard he had visited on a trip to California. He said the sommelier at the vineyard had told him it was an exceptional vintage. He said he had been saving it for a special occasion. The bottle, I would find out later when curiosity got the better of me, retailed for between $400 and $500. I looked it up on my phone while I was washing dishes after everyone had gone home. We sat down to eat. The brisket was good. It was better than good. It was the kind of meal that makes a table quiet for a few minutes, which is the highest compliment food can receive. Douglas had 2 servings. Beverly said it reminded her of a place she used to go to in Nashville. Even Natalie said it was delicious, which cost her something, I could tell. After dinner, Curtis cleared his throat and said he had something for Douglas. He went to the hallway closet, a closet in my house, a closet I had built out with custom shelving when we first moved in 21 years ago, and came back with 2 gift bags. He handed the first one to Douglas. Inside was a bottle of bourbon. Not just any bourbon, a single barrel, single estate Kentucky bourbon from a distillery I recognized as one of the most sought after in the state, the kind that doesn't sit on shelves, the kind you get on an allocation list if you know the right people. I had tried to get a bottle of it for Christmas 2 years running, and had come up short both times. I have no idea what Curtis paid for it or where he found it, but I know it was not cheap, and I know it required effort. Douglas opened it and made a sound that men make when they are genuinely impressed, but do not want to show too much of it. He said, "Son, this is incredible." He clapped Curtis on the shoulder. Curtis reached into the second gift bag and handed me something. It was a gas station gift card. I know this because it still had the little display hanger attached to the back, the kind they used to hang them on the rotating rack by the register at the Quick Trip. It was for $15, not $1,500, not $50. 15, there was no card with it. 15. There was no card with it, no note, just the gift card in a tissue paper nest inside a small gift bag that still had the price tag on the bottom. The bag itself had cost $2.49. The table was quiet. Beverly looked at her plate. Douglas looked at the bourbon bottle. Natalie looked at Curtis with a slight smile that I was not supposed to see. I looked at the gift card in my hand for 1 or 2 seconds. Then I smiled, because I am my father's son, and I said, "Thank you, this is great." I meant none of it. I kept eating. After everyone left and Curtis and Natalie had gone upstairs, I sat in my kitchen alone for a long time. I am not a man who cries easily. I did not cry. I just sat there with my hands flat on the kitchen table looking at that gift card, and I thought about the brisket I had started at 11 o'clock the night before. I thought about my wife's cobbler recipe. I thought about the custom shelving in the hallway closet. I thought about 28 years of cosigns and tuition checks and being there on a Saturday morning when your son calls because he and his wife need a place to land. I thought about Natalie's voice through the kitchen window, flat and practical. "Your dad's not going to live forever." I made a decision that night. I did not share it with anyone. I did not call my brother. I did not text my friend Lewis, who had heard his share of my grievances about this situation over the past 2 years. I just went upstairs, got ready for bed, and in the morning I called my attorney. His name is Ted. We have worked together for 15 years. He is methodical and quiet and expensive, and he does not ask unnecessary questions. I told him I wanted to update my estate documents and that I needed to talk through some things related to the house and my financial accounts. He said, "Come in, Thursday." I came in Thursday. I want to be clear about what I did and did not do, because I am not a vindictive person. I am not interested in punishment for its own sake. What I am interested in is clarity, and in making sure that my life's work goes where I intend it to go and not to people who are counting the years until it falls to them by default. I removed Curtis from the beneficiary designation on my primary investment account. Not permanently, that was not the intention, but I moved those funds into a trust with specific conditions, and Curtis's access to the trust would be contingent on terms that Ted helped me articulate. I also made a number of changes to my will, the most significant of which was removing the provision that would have allowed Curtis and Natalie to remain in my home for up to a year in the event of my death, before the estate was settled. I added a line that said the house was to be listed for sale within 30 days. Then I did something simpler, something that had nothing to do with attorneys. I called my mortgage broker, not because I had a mortgage, I do not, but because I knew he had a contact at a real estate investment firm that had been eyeing properties in my neighborhood for a mixed-use development project. I had been approached twice about selling and had declined. I called him and said I was reconsidering. I asked him to put me in touch with the development contact again and to let them know I might be ready to move. Within 48 hours, I had an offer in my email. It was a cash offer. It was a strong cash offer. Strong enough that I sat with it for 2 days just looking at it, running the numbers, before I did anything at all. On the third day, I called Ted again. On the fourth day, while Curtis was at work and Natalie was at Pilates, I had a very calm and straightforward conversation with a real estate attorney about the process of selling a property you own outright with other adults living in it as guests without a lease. The answer, in case you were wondering, is that it is your property and you can sell it. Guests without a lease have no claim. You provide reasonable notice. The specifics depend on the state, and Georgia has its own rules about this, which Ted walked me through. And then you proceed. I decided to wait until I had signed a purchase agreement before I told Curtis, not to be cruel, because I needed the decision to be made before the conversation happened, so that the conversation could not become a negotiation. I signed the purchase agreement on a Tuesday morning. That evening, when Curtis came home from work, I asked him to sit down with me in the living room. Natalie was upstairs. I did not ask her to join us. I told Curtis that I had sold the house. I told him the closing date. I told him I wanted to give him and Natalie 60 days, which was more than the legally required notice because he was my son and I was not interested in putting him on the street. I watched his face go through several things in about 10 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, a flash of something that might have been anger, which I held his gaze through until it passed. He said, "Dad, what? When did? Why?" I said, "I've been thinking about it for a while. It's too big for one person, and the offer was excellent." He said, "But where are you going to go?" I told him I was buying a smaller place. I had already found a condo in a 55-plus community in Alpharetta that I had been looking at quietly for about a year. 2 bedrooms, a maintenance-free setup, a pool, a community of people roughly my age who had lives and opinions and did not call me Harold. He sat with that for a minute. Then he said quietly, "Is this because of Father's Day?" I looked at him. I said, "It's because of a lot of things, Curtis. It's because of 2 years of things. The Father's Day thing just helped me see them clearly." There was a long silence. He put his head in his hands. "I want you to understand that I did not enjoy watching my son do that. I am not the kind of father who takes satisfaction in a child's distress. It costs me something even now to write about it. But there is a difference between causing pain unnecessarily and letting someone feel the weight of the choices they have made. I was not causing this pain. I was simply no longer absorbing it alone." Over the next 2 weeks, I watched Curtis do something I had not seen him do in several years. He started asking questions, not angry ones, real ones. He asked me to have coffee one morning. "Just us," he said, "not in the house. Let's go somewhere." And we sat in a diner 2 miles away for almost 2 hours. He asked me what it had been like the last 2 years. He asked me to be honest. I was. I told him about the kitchen cabinets. He looked mortified, the way you look when you hear something small that somehow tells you everything. I told him about Douglas's visits and being left out of the dinners. I told him about the window, the 2 in the morning, Napoli's voice. He went very still at that. He said, "She said that?" I said, "She did." He was quiet for a long time after that. He stirred his coffee even though he takes it black and had not added anything to it. He said, "I'm sorry, Dad. I don't know how I let it get this far." I told him that being sorry was the beginning of something, not the end of it. The closing on my house happened on a Thursday. I had already moved most of my things to a storage unit and the rest to the condo, which I had closed on 2 weeks prior. Curtis and Natalie had moved into a furnished short-term rental while they figured out their next steps. I helped Curtis move 3 boxes on my last day in the house, because he asked me to and because I wanted to. We did not talk much. We did not need to. Natalie did not speak to me on moving day. She stood in the driveway in her Lululemon and watched the movers work and did not say goodbye when I left. I had not expected her to. Douglas, I was told by Beverly, who had started calling me occasionally, which I found unexpectedly touching, was furious about the whole situation and blamed me entirely for destabilizing his daughter's life. This did not trouble me. A man who takes his son-in-law to dinner twice a year while his daughter lives rent-free in someone else's house and never once says thank you to that someone has no complaint to make about anything. Curtis and Natalie separated 4 months later. She moved back to Savannah to be closer to her parents, which was where I had always suspected she actually wanted to be. Curtis took an apartment near Midtown. He called me when it happened, not in pieces, not in stages, but in one long phone call on a Sunday afternoon where he talked and I mostly listened and occasionally said the things that needed to be said. At the end of that call he said, "I think I've been asleep for a long time." I said, "I know. I watched it happen. I should have said something sooner." He said, "Would it have mattered?" I thought about that honestly. I said, "Probably not. Some things a person has to see for themselves." He laughed a little at that, the kind of laugh that has some grief in it. He comes over to my condo most Sundays now. I make breakfast, eggs, bacon, toast, the cast iron skillet that I found in the back of the lower cabinet and brought with me, the one I have seasoned for 15 years. We eat at my small kitchen table. We watch whatever game is on. Sometimes we talk about real things and sometimes we don't talk about much at all, and both of those are fine. Last June, on Father's Day, he showed up at my door with a card he had written himself, 3 pages, front and back, in his own handwriting, and a bottle of bourbon. Not the expensive allocated kind, just a good one, something he had picked out himself at a shop he liked. I read the card at the kitchen table while he made coffee. I did not say anything when I finished reading it. I just folded it carefully and put it in my shirt pocket, and we both understood what that meant. The cast iron was already on the stove. The eggs were already cracked. The morning was already ours. I still think about that cast iron skillet sometimes. 15 years of seasoning, built up slowly, layer by layer, from 10,000 ordinary mornings. You cannot rush that, you cannot fake it. And if someone shoves it to the back of a cabinet because it is inconvenient to them, it does not become less valuable, it just becomes invisible to the wrong people. That is what I had allowed to happen to myself for 2 years. I do not say that with bitterness. I say it because understanding it clearly is the only thing that made me capable of changing it. The truth I had to sit with. At 2 in the morning on my back porch listening to my daughter-in-law calculate my mortality through an open window is that nobody can make you invisible without your cooperation. I had been cooperating. I had smiled at the $15 gift card. I had said, "Thank you, this is great." I had absorbed the weight of it alone, the way I had absorbed so many things alone, and I had told myself that patience was the same thing as strength. It is not. Patience without discernment is just slow erosion. What I had to learn, later in life than I would have liked, is that there is a version of strength that looks like stillness from the outside, but is actually a kind of moral clarity working underneath. When I finally called Ted, when I finally called my mortgage broker, I was not acting out of anger. I was acting out of a settled understanding of what was true and what I was worth, and what I was willing to accept going forward. That is the difference between a reaction and a decision. Curtis had to learn something harder. He had to learn that love without attention becomes negligence, and negligence has consequences that pile up quietly until one day they are undeniable. He is a good man. I have always believed that, but goodness alone is not enough. You have to be awake. You have to look at the people in your life and ask yourself honestly whether you are seeing them or whether you have stopped looking, because looking requires something from you. Curtis had stopped looking at me. He had also, I think, stopped looking at himself. What saved him, what saves most people who find their way back from something like this, was not an argument or an ultimatum. It was consequence met with honesty. When he sat across from me at that diner and asked me to tell him what it had actually been like, he was doing something that requires real courage. He was choosing to know something uncomfortable rather than staying comfortable in his own version of events. That is not nothing. That took everything he had at that moment. I respected him for it. I told him so. The thing I want people who are in the middle of this kind of situation to understand, whether you are the parent, the child, or the person watching it happen from the outside, is that the outcome is not inevitable. It is built or it is lost through accumulated small choices made every single day. The $15 gift card was not the wound. The wound was 2 years of small choices that had said without words that I did not matter as much as someone else's comfort. The gift card just had the decency to say it out loud. And sometimes You need something to say it out loud. Most Sunday mornings now, I hear Curtis's car in the lot before I hear him knock. I already have the skillet on the stove. I already have the coffee going. And in those few seconds between the sound of his car and the sound of his knock, there is something I feel that I do not have a precise word for. It is not quite happiness, and it is not quite relief. It is more like the feeling of something being exactly what it is supposed to be. That is what I was protecting all along.